Shit. Well, hope you've all had a nice Christmas break. I haven't, because I've been trying to figure out how to uncorrupt a file. I've recorded this video like 3 times. You don't want to hear about it. Why am I even talking about this? We're doing mid, peak, or ass. Welcome to the mid-offs. Let's go. Now, technically premiered in 2022. I'm talking about movies that premiered in 2023. Talk to me. I thought it was great. This is peak, very peak. Sophie Wilder's peak. Cameron Work's peak. The fact that it's about being chased by a demon and about the fear of loneliness and everyone leaving you either by dying or hating you is peak. As much as about being chased by monsters. So mid, it's ass. Aside from Danny Francesco, who is Josh Hartnett, and then Hugh Grant's relationship with him is kind of cute, and they have a cute post-credit scene, even though he's doing the same accent as he did in The Gentleman. The point is, it's pretty mid. Action's mid, so mid it's ass. This is peak though. This is pretty peak. It's very fun. The energy is peak. The cinematography is peak. The fact that it's about both black trans sex workers as individuals and balances all their different personalities, while also being about black trans sex work as a collective and a theme. That's peak. I like this. I like this format. Passages, very peak. Peak color palette. I think I need more light in my face. Yeah, I'm gonna get a light. Please ignore that the light on my face is a completely different color temperature than every other light in this room. Very peak. This is peak. Peak drama. Looks great. Peak Franz Rogowski performance. And peak Adele Exarchopoulos, who has a great name. And it's great to see this man it's peak to see this man be the worst man in the world. This is, you know what? This was made by my teacher from TAFE, and I got a little bit in trouble for giving it a, let's say, less than stellar review. But I will say that there is a scene in this movie that parodies this specific type of horror movie fan that is obsessed with practical effects and wears a leather jacket and it's like a little bit misogynistic and thinks they're slick but isn't. And I've never seen that type of horror movie fan parodied before, but I've seen them around. And for parodying that niche, that is very peak. So, watch it on Tubi. I'd say this is peak. I'd say Jay Baruchel's pretty peak. The fact that you see his performance change throughout the whole thing. Although there are some repetitive scenes. There are some scenes that are kind of mid because of how repetitive they are. Like whenever they go to the Verizon boardroom meeting, and there's always that guy that goes like, "Oh, well, I'd like to see you. This is actually a pretty big flaw. Oh, well, that's an interesting solution." And that scene happens like 3 separate times. The wigs are arse, and the Cinema Verite style I'd call mid, but it adds a lot of energy, so it's kind of peak. Oh, this is so stupid. But I'd say I'd recommend it at least. That's how peak it is. I'd recommend it. Peak. This is peak action, peak Keanu Reeves performance because he sells it in his eyes. And if you took away his eyes, the whole series wouldn't work. So it's peak. And looks peak. And the incredible peak action and music. This movie's pretty peak. Sorry if I'm looking at the monitor and not the lens. Anyway, peak tension. Peak Dave Bautista and supporting performances and everyone. And I like that it's peak that M. Night Shyamalan has. I understand why people say his writing's a little on the nose and kind of, or weird, people talk weird because they talk in a way that's kind of blunt. And often a lot of the civilian side characters can talk in a way that's as sort of OCD, detail-orientated as the OCD, not to persecute anyone with OCD, of course, but those kind of detail-orientated freaks those kind of guys, but I thought it worked for this, considering how blunt that was and how to get the characters talking out loud, get you a full perspective of their character, and the flashbacks, of course. You know, it's a violent movie, and has that violent tone. So the fact that it's a little blunt, I thought worked, and I thought the drama was riveting enough to where, you know, even if some of it, I don't think it was handled clumsily, but even if you think it was, like, I think it's interesting enough. You know, peak relationships, peak ending. Peak. I'm very excited for this peak era of M. Night Shyamalan. Mid? I'm gonna give it a little more credit than that. It's good. It's not peak, but I feel like it's not as good as Game Night, and the visuals are pretty mid. Even if Chris Pine is peak-ish. But there's like a scene at the end where it's like Michelle Rodriguez's character and Chris Pine and his daughter, and it's a very poignant emotional moment, and the lighting is just so flat. It looks like it's shot at midday, and it's like, I know it's cliche, can we put like a sunset or something a bit more dramatic? But I think that some of the framing, the action scenes is pretty kinetic and peak. But the Aunty Donna cameo is pretty peak, and the bridge joke, I thought some of the jokes were pretty peak as well. Sorry if I'm laughing too much. I've never said the peak and mid so many times in this amount of time. I call this peak. Like Late Night with the Devil. David Dastmalchian is certainly peak. The AI intertitles are arse. But Ian Bliss is pretty peak. And I think the ending was pretty big and raucous, and that's why I thought it was peak. Because I thought, oh, it's cool that it's fun. Yeah. I call it, yeah, I don't know, it's kind of mid. There's a lot of the jokes in this kind of hit or miss, or as us cool kids say, peak or us. But I think the hits become pretty charming, and there's a lot of good punchlines. I Stand with the Bank of America is that joke is hilarious. I thought Tilda Swinton and Julio Torres' relationship was pretty peak. I thought Tilda Swinton's character was going to be arse because of how loud and brave she is. But I thought she was quite fun. And the visuals, they were pretty naturalistic, and they incorporate the color temperature of whatever lighting was in whatever environment it was in. It kind of looks a little cheap, but I didn't mind that. I didn't find that too mid. And I thought there were some pretty peak visuals. The visual metaphors of like the maze, and there were some peak visuals, even if some of it looks kind of cheap, but I don't think it looked mid. But this does. This looks arse, actually. This is yeah. I'd call this arse. I didn't even hate it. I just pity it. Because it's from a director who's out of his depth, and a star who sucks, and it looks arse, and it's a part of a dying universe, and The Rock won't let them have Shazam's biggest villain. So I pity the movie, and that's why I want to call it mid as opposed to arse. But there is like no character arc for Billy Batson. The sister goes like, oh, you have abandonment issues. Then like an hour later he goes to his foster mom and says, I have abandonment issues. And then his foster mom's like, well, we're not going to abandon you, don't worry. And then that's it. Like, there's not a consistent theme throughout the movie, really. And that is a downgrade. That is an arse grade from the first one, which I thought had a pretty charming character arc. But, yeah, unfortunate. Yeah, I hope David F. Sandberg makes some good, smaller movies, because this wasn't it. And yeah, a lot of scenes look faker than, like, Megalopolis. It's really, I don't like how this looks, but, you know, c'est la vie. At least the DCEU's done. Air. It's good. Air's good. Yeah, I like Air. Sorry, it's peak. I wouldn't call it peak. It's kind of, well, no, it has some mid qualities, but I'll say, if you can get over the fact that it is an advertisement for shoes made by slaves, which they even acknowledge in the movie, then you will, I think, get a bit out of this. Because I think there's some very peak movie star charismatic performances, and I enjoy it. But yeah, I'd call this pretty, I'd say the visuals of this are pretty peak. Joaquin Phoenix is peak at playing a nerd and like a wimp, and you know, even if I thought it was really mid or even a little arse when I walked out of the cinema, staying with it for longer made me appreciate it more and appreciate what Ari Aster was doing, and that he made such an abrasive movie. Even if it's more of a vibe, it's like a bad vibe, even if it just doesn't, it's an arse vibe, sorry. Even if it doesn't really have like a traditional resolving wrap up. But yeah, I thought it was pretty good. A peak. Oh, this is peak. Yeah, I thought this was peak, very peak. I like this a lot. I mean, I'm a little biased. This and Across the Spider-Verse, which I'll talk about in a bit. I love the first movies, and I have very fond memories of the first movies, so I already really care about these characters. So if you don't, and if you're not on board with a sense of humor, especially. I know James Gunn has a very abrasive sense of humor, but I like that because it feels very human and down to earth and natural and not clean, which I enjoy. And I thought that the way it wrapped up everyone's relationships, Star-Lord, and even how they incorporated Gamora, even though she's not even the same character she was in the first two, I thought that was pretty peak drama. And I thought it was pretty peak visuals as well. I actually really think this was a very fun looking movie. Action was shot in a really fun way. And really beautiful. Very peak. This was peak as well. I'd say this has peak visuals. I think it has very intuitive sort of camera work, the way that Spielberg does. I find the way the blocking and the relationship between the camera and the actors was very riveting, sort of like a dance. It's very visually different from Broker, which is the only other movie I've seen by Hirokazu Koreeda made this. Very visually different, but I still thought it looked great. And the contrast, it looked peak. My apologies. And I thought the contrast between the nature, the woods, all that, and where the characters can sort of, those kids see they're running in the grass and sort of be free. And, you know, the more drab establishments like the school and the supermarket, I thought that was very visually engaging. And I enjoyed that a lot. And I enjoyed this a lot. It had very good drama. And it had very peak drama. And the fact that you see everyone's perspectives was pretty peak. And I thought it was great. And I thought this was good. Even though it has pretty good animation, I just think, you know, not to get ahead of myself, but this reminded me a lot of The Creator, in the fact that if you can stomach a lot of the genre conventions and cliches that come along with the very generic plot, then there is a lot of cool world building behind it. But I don't know, I just didn't care about either of these fucking, like that one of the main characters. Didn't give a fuck about any of them, and it has a very short runtime, so it just doesn't have time to build either their relationships in a very interesting way, which is a shame because it's good to see an adult-orientated animated film, but the vibes were just a little too clean and kind of simplistic for me. It didn't work, which is a shame. And this is pretty, I'd say this is arse. The visuals are certainly arse, which is a horrible shame because Indiana Jones is probably the most visually consistent and good looking series in Hollywood history. I mean, I know people have problems with the fourth one because it looks, you know, the CGI is pretty arse, and it kind of has that look similar to like The Hobbit, where it looks like a Thomas Kinkade painting where everything's kind of shiny and it just looks weird and a bit off. Whatever problems it has, it still looks better than this. And whatever, you know, problems the CGI has in the last one, it still looks more interesting and has more intricate blocking and uses light and shadows and color in a more interesting way than just the kind of drab beige wash that this one has. And James Mangold, who's a good director, but especially visually, I don't think he's a good successor. And I think there's only maybe like 5 or 6, no, like maybe like 3 directors aside from Spielberg who could have done this and pulled it off, but he isn't one of them. And Harrison Ford's performance was pretty peak though, but I didn't like Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I thought she was a bit mid. And Diet Short Round. And Mads Mikkelsen has like nothing. He's more peak, pardon me, than Cate Blanchett in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. That's such an arse bar. And I thought this was kind of arse as well. Because it's directed by Sean Price Williams, who's done some very peak cinematography for the Safdie brothers. He shot Good Time, and then he directed. I think he was the co-cinematographer and director of this. But yeah, I don't know. The humor was pretty. I found the humor pretty mid. This sounds really funny considering James Gunn makes superhero movies for 14-year-olds, but I feel like even he makes movies that incorporate a sort of vulgar sense of humor better than this. And whenever it tries to break from that ironic sensibility, that ironic atmosphere, it doesn't feel sincere. It just kind of feels post-ironic. Or like not even. It just feels like, oh, we're doing a moment that's kind of trying to be awe-inspiring and trying to slow down and incorporate nature. But isn't it funny that we're doing it because we have such an ironic sense of humor? And it didn't work for me. But I hope Sean Price Williams continues to make movies and he stops being so mid or arse. Yeah, I'd call this peak. And it's peak animation, really. I thought the musical sequences were kind of mid, but they had a lot of really interesting visuals and fun visuals that kept them interesting and kept them peak. And a lot of peak comedy. I laughed a bit. I thought it was endearing. I liked a lot of the relationships that built up throughout the movie. Yeah, just a peak kids movie. Very fun, very endearing, and it's very funny, and it's like 73 minutes long. 76, 75, something like that. I'd recommend it. It's peak. This is peak, I'd say. I'd say this is Natalie Portman's peakest performance. Julianne Moore's pretty good. Charles Melton, I'd never seen in anything. I saw him later in Bad Boys 3, and he's trying to do that like young, cocky Tom Cruise kind of thing, and it's like, I don't know, man, you're not, I don't think you're built for this. And then when he slows down, does dramatic work like that, he becomes more peak and less mid. Yeah, I thought he was excellent in this. And, you know, Corey Michael Smith was pretty peak as well. A lot of the other side characters were pretty peak, a lot of peak performances. Visuals I found a little mid because they're very drawn back and restrained. Because it's trying to be a bit bland, and I like that. It's kind of bland because it's trying to interrogate that feeling of the white suburban upper middle class facade covering and justifying the horrible actions committed by bloody Julianne Moore. So I thought that looked good, even though I can understand why people thought it was kind of mid, because it is trying to do that film. It has a lot of grain, so it kind of feels like it's trying to do a film emulation, even though it doesn't. You can immediately tell. Yeah, I thought the music was pretty mid because it's repurposed music by Michel Legrand. It was like, it's very dramatic and melodramatic, which matches the music he's done. I haven't seen the movie that they took the music from to put in this, but I've watched some of the Jacques Demy movies that he's scored, and it's very melodramatic. It deserves that big energy, but it was a little too far into the melodrama for me, and this movie's kind of balancing that stuff that's kind of funny and kind of big and kind of more haunting and slow, and that was just a step too far. But aside from that, I thought it was pretty peak, and it's probably my favorite Todd Haynes movie. I don't know, I still like Dark Waters. I'm not a big fan of the Bob Dylan one, sorry. Or Carol. I like Cate Blanchett and Carol. So I think it's her best performance. But enough about Todd Haynes. This Robot Dreams was pretty peak. Very fun, very funny, very endearing peak relationship. A lot of peak different atmospheres, locations it explores. Uses its short runtime to its advantage. Very endearing, just like a peak perfect ending. I thought it was brilliant. Yeah, I had a great time watching this. It's like classic Pixar, you know? It's like that perfect level. I thought it was just brilliant. What's the next movie going to be? I don't even know. I'm going to place my bets. I think it's Perfect Days. Damn it! Close your eyes. Yeah, this is a peak. This is the peakest of all peak movies right here. Great atmosphere. Very vivid atmosphere. Looks brilliant. You can it's just so thick. Such a thick, brilliant atmosphere. You could live in it. Brilliant sound design. It embodies that feeling of reminiscing on lost time, that melancholy. So that's so peak. I can't recommend this enough. I'd say this is peak. It has peak comedy. I think the drama, it's just, I don't know. I don't know how fair it is to compare this to Wes Anderson's other movies, because on the one hand, this should live on its own, and it does live on its own, but on the other hand, he kind of does invite comparisons just by visually being quite similar and doing a lot of similar themes he's done before. You know, I feel like a lot of his movies could use a little more breathing room, maybe. Could be just like a little less planned out. But I thought this was way better than The French Dispatch. I think that is the middest of mid movies, and I just don't like that one at all. But I thought this was pretty peak, and I thought Jason Schwartzman was peak. And the theatricality in the natural desert and those sets was very peak. That contrast. Is this Perfect Days? No, it's Fallen Leaves. Fallen Leaves. I'd call this one peak as well. It's like, this one's like 80 minutes as well, very short, very deadpan, but how it was able to balance the deadpan while also being quite romantic or dramatic. It was very low key, but those subtle shifts where it got a bit more dramatic, it got a bit more romantic, felt way bigger, you know, relatively. It just felt really real and charming and peak. Oh, jeez Louise. This one's also a subtle movie. I kind of thought this was mid when I walked out. I was like, I'm never gonna think about this again. Which is fine, because it has a great atmosphere, but I guess I'm just not used to a movie that uses atmosphere as much as this one does. It's very subtle. But I really enjoyed that, and I guess I don't really think about it that much, but whenever I do, it's very pleasant, and it's very nice, and it's a lovely movie. It's nice. It's peak. Yeah, it's peak. Oh, here's Perfect Days. I call this one peak as well. The visuals are pretty peak. It's very clean, but it doesn't feel synthetic or bland, which is a hard balance to strike. Peak performance. Peak visuals, lovely music, peak drama, you know? Feels very real, very nice, very human. It's about being content. It has that creeping melancholy to it, and it has that happiness, that joy, that brilliant balance throughout that entire week. And I think it was peak. The story takes place over a week, that's why. This movie's, there's like a stretch from like the halfway point to maybe, oh god, the last 30 minutes that I'd say verges on mid. The main character's arc kind of wraps up by the halfway point. It doesn't really, there's still a twist. It doesn't come until like basically the ending, so for a while, you're watching something that's really driven by Song Kang-ho, who is peak, has a peak performance, of course he does. But yeah, it doesn't feel as driven. It kind of feels like it's running on fumes. It's losing steam a bit. But it feels like the farcical elements don't feel as driven. It feels like fucking around for the sake of fucking around, which is still funny. It just doesn't feel like it has as much of a purpose. So that's a bit mid, but it's still really, the visuals are peak. Such kinetic, really brilliant visuals, really exciting editing, really fun, big drama. Yes, but it does slow, yeah. Yeah, peak. It's peak. I need to watch more movies by Kim Ji-woon. Yeah, I'd call this peak. I'd call Josh O'Connor's performance certainly very peak. I call the visuals quite peak. I just feel like it could have used a bit more relativity, especially in the visuals. Whenever it's sad or whenever it's happy, a lot of the time the visuals just stay really drab and crusty and grey and textured like that, you know. And I could have used a bit more, yeah, something a little bit different. But I still do really admire, especially keeping those brighter moments in something that's rooted a little more in the poorer settings these characters inhabit. I admire that. I thought that was very peak. I wish I liked it a bit more, but I still do really admire it. And I do love Josh O'Connor's performance, and yeah. It's just a bit too Italian for me. That's what I'll say. The Italianness makes it a bit midder than it should be, but you know what, it's just a bit peak. But this is pretty peak.